Welcome to the second dimension, everyone. I'm Jonathan, and today I'm doing an interview with Sean and John from the crew of Disney's DuckTales 2017. So, welcome to the interview, guys.
Hey,
Hey,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Good to see you.
So, for those watching who maybe don't know you, go ahead and kind of just give an introduction to your journey into the animation industry and just kind of, who you are. So, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, if you can, recap the journey so far.
Minutes.
Sure.
Okay, we'll try.
We'll try. Sean, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think. Well, just so you know, John and I actually go way back, and we're buds. Like John was the best man at my wedding.
Wow.
We met in an animation class when we were in
I was 15.
School.
Yeah.
And I was
14
16.
or 15.
I just got my license. All I want to do is get into animation. I went to this, it was a regional occupation program called Roland Animation. And I went to it, and that's where I met John. And it was just like kind of fundamentals of animation course. It was really amazing. And it was ROP, meaning it's original occupation program. So it's like this particular high school had like auto shop and an animation program.
Wow.
So we, like my high school just had auto shop. I had to travel. I did research and there's no research. It wasn't internet research. It was, it was the career. I went to the career consultant at our high school, and they knew about this program. And I had to drive out. I lived in a town called Laverne, so I had to drive out about 30 minutes out to Roland Heights to where this program was. Wow. And it was an after school program. So once you were done with your regular classes, you spent the rest of the afternoon in this animation program. And that's where John and I met. And we've been buds ever since.
That's dedication.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the buddy part, John. You could talk about the career stuff.
Okay, I'll start with the career stuff. From Roland Heights, I actually went to that high school called Roland, John A. Roland, in Roland Heights. From there, I went to Cal Arts, and my first job was Futurama. I studied to be, I didn't think I'd be a director. Currently director now. Been director on series and currently first time on a film. But prior to that, I, going throughout the animation courses and Cal Arts, I I pursued being an animator, like a traditional 2D animator, and never thought that I'd ever would be in a director's seat or be in story, period. So I focused on the technical aspects of animation, and one of the first jobs was Futurama. And back then, there was a position called character layout, which was basically animator for television animation. And what was great about that was, it didn't matter, if you're a starting animator on a production, you just got to do like key scenes with the main characters.
Right.
Unlike feature, you had to work your way up to these key scenes or pivotal moment in the film, or I should say the show. But it was a great opportunity, and I just found myself being offered a assistant director position on Futurama for a director named Ron Hugart, and after that show ended, I got to work with him again on American Dad. And on that show, he gave me a director position shot, and I just been directing since. That's sort of my quick way to explain my career journey.
That's awesome. Yeah, you kind of just work through the different shows and learn and gain experience. What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I'll tag in. So I got a job. I got really lucky, and out of that animation, that Roland animation program when I was 18, there just so happened to have a training program at Disney Feature Animation, and I jumped on it. And it wasn't offered to Roland, but it was around this time where there was a lot of work. Training programs were starting to like billow up, at that time. Now we're talking 1994 when this is going on. So I got really lucky. I was thinking about going to Cal Arts. John was already off to Cal Arts, right? No, I was first. I came first. So I got a job. I got into the training program at Disney Feature Animation and was in cleanup. Got a job as a cleanup artist and worked on I worked on Pocahontas, Hunchback, Hercules, and Mulan as a cleanup artist. And so back then they had contracts. Like I was on I don't know, 3-year,
Wow.
they couldn't, that was a weird, totally different time in the industry.
They had to find something for you to do.
Yeah, so I was just kind of working my way through and clean up and learning the craft. Like I was basically just learning how to animate and learning how to follow up the animator's works, right? With key drawings and doing the in-betweens. And so it was that sort of on the ground, just learning like the molecular aspects of the animation process.
Right.
And then when my contract came up, I left and worked with John again at a startup company for like a year, where we're like really young, right? We're like 21 years old, but John was younger. We started working.
It was 97, yeah.
97 is a company called Trillionaire. And through that experience, I got to know a lot of John's colleagues at Cal Arts, which is a few, like Shane Prigmore, a few of these people who ended up becoming close friends we all just became kind of a crew in a way. Yeah. And so when that project was over, Iron Giant was getting started. So we got opportunity and I went over to Iron Giant, still in cleanup. I was in cleanup on Iron Giant. I was a key assistant on Iron Giant. And then after that, I went to Imagineering and was an audio animatronic animator at Imagineering. It would take too long to tell you how I shifted over into that form of things. Let's just say all of this is generally like the animation underneath the umbrella of being an animator. There was these strange opportunities that opened up in different areas.
Quick question about that detour. Were you working more in 3D on Iron Giant, or were you still doing 2D?
It was all 2D, yeah. It was all 2D.
So animatronics was like a whole, that was a
animatronic, it was like a whole new, and that was like it was a strange hybrid program. I don't want to get too caught up in it, but it's fascinating in and of itself because they have a proprietary kind of animation program that's sort of like Maya, but it was developed in the 60s and 70s. So it was like it's really interesting, archaic, but actually really quite sophisticated. They had a lot of the tools that were like used in Maya, but back then. And so you had to learn this proprietary software. So in a way, I became a weird sort of pseudo animatronic animator, sort of like a CG animator / puppeteer.
That's really cool.
Like literally like puppeteering the animatronic robots, as well as you would like lay in keyframes, just like you would in animation. But in between the robots, you puppeteered the movements from one key to the other, like live puppeteering, and it would record the movements. You would puppeteer the movements and record them from key pose to key pose. So that was like really an interesting career path. But the thing about Imagineering is, at least in that job, if they're not building a park or there's not a big project to be assigned to,
you can get laid off.
There's just a lot of work to do. You just don't, you could, they could keep you and you could be an animator that's fixing, like I worked on the Tiki Bird revision in Tokyo Disneyland, and I worked on Winnie the Pooh's Honey Hunt, which is an e-ticket big spectacular ride at Tokyo Disneyland.
Oh yeah, it's like a big trackless ride, and they got the whole
that's the early stages of the free roaming vehicle programming that's now being utilized, all over the place.
That was so ahead of its time.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. So there was this stint. I had this sort of period of time where I was doing that, and then it just it's sort of like once the parks were, once Tokyo Disney Sea was open, there wasn't really a lot of challenging work, and I really missed drawing because I didn't draw the whole time I was like an animator, like at Imagineering, because you don't need to draw. You're we would draw cute poses, but you would just be loading those into the robots, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of drawing, and I really missed it, and I knew that I still had to keep just getting better at my art and craft.
Right.
And so after that, I actually got back together with John, and I was talking to John, and John encouraged me to go to Cal Arts. At this point, I was 27.
So back to college.
Too old. I wasn't too old for it, but I had like a lot of work experience prior to going to Cal Arts. So I decided to go to Cal Arts so I could just continue to, like, the one thing I didn't know how to do. I learned a lot of technical things in animation, but I never really expressed myself through this knowledge, and that was the thing I kind of yearned for. And I was young enough that it was, I was still had opportunities to try things out, and it was really John who encouraged me, like, you should, I was in a rut, and I went to him, and he's like, you should go to Cal Arts. You can make your films, and then see what comes next. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me at that point.
Yeah.
In my life. And so I came out of Cal Arts. I graduated in the class with that at Cal Arts. I met Alex Hirsch, who's the creator of Gravity Falls, and we were in the trenches together. And we were like, everybody like who was at Cal Arts, like, I'm still really close to a lot of the people I went to school at Cal Arts, because you're just in the trenches. There's like battle metaphors come to mind where you just start you're going through battle. It's like virtually impossible to make a film by yourself, but somehow you do it, you pull it off, and you need all of this, you need all these people to support you, and you're just like working, your entire life is dedicated to doing it. So that's where we got these, trauma bonded with like Alex Hirsch and Penn Ward. And I was a bit older, but those guys were young, really young, and all they wanted to do was be showrunners. Like, they wanted to make TV animated shows.
Yeah, Sean's Cal Arts generation was a lot of show creators, where I had a lot of animators
and hardcore animators.
Yeah, hardcore animators and directors.
Yeah, and then John was my roommate. So John like owned a condo already. I'm just going to college and was broke as just no money. And John's like, you could rent a room for cheaper than you would normally spend and be my roommate. So even though I was at Cal Arts and John was directing at the time, John was my roommate and was part of that whole crew too. You'll like, go to Cal Arts and hang out with me, with Alex Hirsch and Penn Ward and J.G. Quintal and a bunch of other really amazing people. But though I'm name dropping those.
Darren Nefsey
was in there. And there was like 3 years. There was like, we were in one class. Penn was in like an upperclassman, and then there was like Darren was a lower classman. But we were, like, I got hooked on the sensibility that these people had. I never met anybody like this before. They were all like, we're going to create TV shows. And I'm like, what? And that's exactly what happened. So I graduated from Cal Arts, and when I graduated, Penn got Adventure Time picked up. So I took a test and I got on Adventure Time and was a writer and board artist on Adventure Time the first season.
Yeah.
And that's where it started. I got into TV. And from that, Alex was at Cartoon Network. And then Alex got an overall deal at Disney TV Animation, and he was developing Gravity Falls. There's a couple of things in the middle, but that's not important. He was developing Gravity Falls. And so I got a chance when he was in development on Gravity Falls. I came over to work on a show called Fish Hooks, but I also got so that was like my day job, which was an incredible experience.
Right.
Lynn Naylor was my mentor, and I learned all of this incredible work, this stuff from Lynn Naylor, and then to help develop Gravity Falls with Alex. And then Alex's show got picked up. So I was on Gravity Falls. And so when I was on Gravity Falls with Alex was looking for directors. And Alex was like, what's John up to? And I was like, well, he's in prime time. This is daytime, but he would love, this is such a great creative project. He might be, so Alex met with John and they worked out a deal, and John became a director on Gravity Falls for a season. All of this stuff is backstory to lead us to, I'm still pulling double duty. It's my career as fast as I can, but also prepping for us being on DuckTales together.
Right.
Yeah.
So through that,
because it's so integrated, and that's why I wanted to bring Sean over, because Sean, I mean, I know we're here for DuckTales, but Sean really helped, like, really create the visuals, you know, the approach for DuckTales.
Yeah.
Design it all. So, you know, but, you know, I thought, you know, like having him on would definitely help give you more insight to the show, but also the journey of getting there too. And
yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
background is really
just
fascinating.
nobody's journey is exactly the same. Does it ever make you kind of like beam with pride when you think about the people that you know in the industry and the things that they've accomplished? Like,
oh man, it's amazing. It's amazing. I'm like feel thankful that I've been in it long enough to know as many people. Now there's like a whole new generation of people we help, you know, in so many words, we've helped train like a new generation of people.
Right.
We're working with really great people that are older than us.
it's crazy to think
more
that
experience.
like Dana Terrace directed the first episode of DuckTales, and like now she's on to the Owl House and everything, and Matt worked on Gravity Falls, and like I know he had an episode of Steven Universe. I was watching, I was like, wait, Matt directed or he boarded an episode of
that sort of generate this sort of like crew, right? And so John and all of that was sort of the backstory to lead to like me getting onto DuckTales in development and helping set it up with Matt Youngberg and Frank Anconi. And then John coming on. It was John and Dana Terrace were the first directors on the project. And so when the directors that early in develop, like that's a sort of cusp from development into series, is sort of John and Dana were on it to help Youngberg forge basically the narrative style of the show. I was like setting up the visual style, but it was John and Dana and Matt Youngberg that were setting up the narrative style, the entertainment style for the show based on Angoni's writing.
Yeah.
So at what point did you all both like kind of meet Frank and Matt at the same time on DuckTales development, or did you have to leave Gravity Falls early to work on it, or were those co-productions? Like, how did you both arrive at, all right, we're committed to DuckTales at this
well, for me there's a big gap. So after Gravity Falls, I went back into development for there was like a long break. John had already left Gravity Falls and moved on to other projects, and you can get into that in a second, John, if you want. But and so I met Matt and Frank right when maybe a month or so into them coming together, and they had a general idea of where they wanted to take DuckTales, but it was mainly focused on the narrative and the character development. They were working on that. I came in like really early to help define what the visual style. There's a lot of red tape on it because we had the original series.
Right.
And so I had a meet and greet with Matt and Frank. And that's always, I've been in a career long enough, like that's a cool project. I was like excited, you know, Shane Prigmore was his executive at the time, and he talked to me first. And it was like, hey, you know, like, I think you might be good for DuckTales. I think you'd get on with Matt and Frank really well. What do you think? And I was like, well, that sounds, dude, what? Like, yeah. Like,
that's a big project.
So yeah, it's like, but I also had, I loved the original series, but I also didn't love it enough that I was afraid to bring a different take to it. Because that was obviously something that the executives are concerned about. And Frank and Matt are like hardcore DuckTales fans, the original series, like hardcore. So they knew they needed somebody kind of like me to go in there and just throw like a curveball and try to shake it out into a new direction. But they definitely had these sort of like thoughts and ideas. So I had a meet and greet with them, and they seem great. You know, there's always like you call it dating, like you go on like a date, you know, in so many ways. You're kind of meeting these. I never worked with Matt and Frank before. So I knew of them, of course, but I didn't know them.
You got to
But
figure
we-
out if your personalities are the right fit.
Yeah, that's really important.
project.
And I had a very like, I don't know exactly where to take it, but what I want to do is like I need it to be. Everyone agrees that it can't be like the original series. As much as maybe hardcore fans would wish it for it to be, that's not how evolution works in
Right.
in art or animation. And so I knew that from like that was part of me. Like Sean's gonna he's like a remixer. Like
Yeah.
I had started getting from Gravity Falls on like a reputation for like rethinking stuff but still honoring it. But you know, so anyways, so we met and it worked out really great. So I was on that for about 5 months of development before the need for directors to really start.
Right.
And then John was working out his situation to get onto the show at that time. So I came out in, so I was about 5 months in. Then we got to like the green light. There's a soft green light that could go on for ages. And then there's the actual, like, we're going to make this green light.
Right.
And then once that happened, everything starts up. And so then John came in right at that beginning, like right there when that started.
So John, you hopped away from Disney for a second. Where you?
I did. So you know, after working on the first season of Gravity Falls, Alex had a break because when he got the overall deal, he was on Fish Hooks, got that up and running, but he wanted his own show, so he went right into development on Gravity Falls, and of course went into first season. And so after that first season, he wanted a break.
Yeah.
And so there was a long hiatus set, and I was like, well, what do I do? And there wasn't any projects that was looking for a director at the time. And coincidentally, a friend of mine was in development and trying to get his own show up. And so I went over to help out on that project. But I was also shopping for another gig outside the studio. And my good friend Shannon Tyndall had just sold a concept over at Leica Studios, and that was Kubo and the Two Strings.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, I need a head of story. Do you want to come up and have an interview with the studio heads and see, I can get you on this project. And fast forward, it all worked out, and I was like, shoot, I would love to work on a feature, let alone the stop motion too, and I get to work with my friend. And so I said, okay, let's do this. And I actually moved up to Portland for the project.
Wow.
So I was head of story for that for a good year, a little over a year. And then I came back to Disney on Pickle and Peanut, and then I to direct on that show. And then and I transitioned over to Darren Nefsey's show, Star vs. Force of Evil, because they needed someone that specialized in traditional 2D animation, because that show, if you don't know, it has started off what's called an asset show, which is like a Harmony technology, like asset-based, almost like Flash. And suddenly the overseas studio couldn't take on the production.
I remember that Mercury Filmworks had to drop out. Yeah,
exactly. Had to switch over to traditional, and that production crew was designed and organized as a asset-based production, and so they didn't really have any 2D specialists on there, and I think they were looking to figure that out. And of course, as they were going through that transition, and I think Darren was like not sure what to do, and then of course Sean steps in and says, talk to John, he's an animator, he knows that stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they talked to me, and then I hopped over to help them out through the what did I come on as? think I was like a
Kinda
post
post
director,
director. Yeah.
or post supervisor type role, where I had to kind of see what kind of work was coming in to help with all the technical aspects of it. Where after that first season, Darren asked me to stay on for the second season and to help set up their new season properly for this production process.
Right.
And so I became
all in the interim is when I'm in development on DuckTales, right?
DuckTales,
Okay.
That's so John's aware of things that are going on because we're buds and we're talking and he's coming over
Right.
and we're
and our good
sharing
friend
it.
Shane Prigmore, who's artist turned executive, who I know from my class when I went to CalArts. And so he was giving me some insights on what was happening, because he knew that I was more of a creative person, and he knew that I was supporting Darren on the technical side. But as things were being developed at Disney TV, I think he was just scouting who could take on some roles, director roles.
Right.
And yeah, after working on the second season of Star as a timing supervisor and a animation supervisor, I an opportunity came with DuckTales, and I recall when I would go downstairs to visit Sean's office, and he's doing these beautiful background designs, right, for what the look of the show might be. And there's some really fun, charming, like elements of it, like if a car goes over a hill, it catches some air, and it was like it had that kind of fun exaggeration to it, but it's still grounded show. And I forget if it was during that just kind of visit to see what he's up to, or if it was like I was already in a conversation of possibly directing on it. But I recall looking at Sean's art going like, I see some Miyazaki element to it, and I know Matt Youngberg is a big anime fan, and I actually know Matt from school as well. So it's all kind of a small world thing. It's not like we were friends and we talked all the time. It's just we recognize each other, and way before Disney, I remember having an interview with him when he was running Ben 10, the show.
Wow.
And so fast forward, here he is at Disney on DuckTales, and then seeing Sean's art, going back to that, I was like, this reminds me of Castle Cagliostro and Miyazaki's work. And so I had that already planted in my head. And I know Dana was already on, I think started her episode. And because it was such a high profile show, there are a lot of people at Disney that were on other shows was like wanting to have a role on that production.
Right, because it's such a classic Disney property. Everybody wants to hop onto the reboot.
Right, so people were willing to like drop their current job to jump onto to DuckTales, but yeah, now that I recall, like I think Matt was already talking to me about possibly coming on, maybe thanks to Sean, putting in words for me. But let's see. I think what happened was, so everyone wanted to come on, and so what they had decided to do was they had to give out tests for directors, because there was such a huge demand for it, and they wanted to treat everyone fairly. And so I took a test. Basically, it's a storyboard test. But what was interesting is that as I said earlier, I took that Miyazaki's Castle Cagliostro planted in my head. So when I took the test, I actually took liberty to add some little visual elements to it. Ooh. And Matt loved it, like from what I've heard, and the tone of the board test. And
John killed it. It was amazing. I was there. All the executives were like, "Oh, this is a no-brainer. Get this guy over on this thing." Matt was happy because there was a tone that was really clear, and it was like a kind of again, like John was saying, grounded but playful in its animation exaggeration, but not
Right.
such that it's like wacky. It was like it's really actually difficult to balance, to get that balancing act.
What?
there.
It wasn't going for the pickle and peanut absurdism?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Jonathan.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So there's that kind of walking that fine line of what Matt wanted, and this is early, so all of this is theory. Like nobody's seeing it in action yet. It's you got to make the thing first. That's the tricky thing about these
Yeah, that's the
shows.
thing. Normally there is a pilot step in a development of a show, but for DuckTales, there wasn't one because I think it had gone through so much development
Yeah,
that by the time it was in Matt's hands, they had to just move forward to release it at a certain date. Like I think it was already late, right?
Yeah, and that
From
was
their
added.
original
That was
plan.
like added. Yeah, and that was a bit of the added stress. Is had to do with like we carried a bit of a burden on our shoulders because they're really green lighting it on the virtue of the fact that it's a reboot of an original, and also the experience of the team that's currently on it and their vision for it. But you're like, again, it's very theoretical. You don't have like a TV show to prove what that theory is. You have a bunch of art, not that much art. You have sort of the vision, and you have some scattered stuff.
It's
And
that
so
school of thought of even if something happens, people will still watch it because it's a reboot. It'll get attention anyways.
yeah,
But
it's about like its
yeah,
longevity, right? It's about
right.
like also the double-edged sword there is you have people, if it doesn't engage them, they won't watch it, and
Right.
that's the tough crowd nowadays, right? So
Right.
you also like the audience has to, and we all knew this. This was all we had signed up for this,
Right.
so we all knew like you got to take it somewhere else, but it's got to also like honor this. It's got to So there's this weird special blend, and again, John, when all these tests were being made, that's what people didn't like to get all of those things into a test was really difficult. So Johns was able to understand, he understood and absorbed those complications. It's got to be charming on its own. It's got to be different. We got to drive deeper into the characters, and we have to see that now. And that's the thing. It's like the original series is great for what it is and what it did, but it is a product of its time. And I don't want to get enemies saying this,
Right.
but it's a product of its time, and there was a very clear direction that Frank and Matt had, which is we want to drive deep into these characters. And it's really hard for a director to do a test to show that there's depth in the subtlety in their acting. That's the thing that takes years of experience that John had, right? So
Yes.
that's like, okay, this guy's great. Let's get him. Dana was the same. Dana was like, Dana's different because she's just sort of Dana's like a little bit more of a phenom. Like she's
Right.
young, but
She's
she has this
young and
incredible
she's
sensitivity towards it.
naturally. Yeah.
It's
Right.
just like incredible, but she's like a different human being because of it. She sees the world,
Right.
So that's how this team kind of forms together, But we were all hyper aware of these things. Like, we talked about this, like Matt and Frank and me talked about, like, how are we going to balance this act? We're going to get haters, but we also got to make our thing, and we have a new generation of viewers that are young. This is gonna be their first version of it, and hopefully the older generation will respect what we're attempting to do with the subject matter
Right.
and the reverence for not the necessarily the 80s version, but Carl Barks's comics
Right. Life
is
and
where it
Times of Scrooge
originated.
McDuck and the whole
Yeah,
comic run and
which is hence
yeah.
the visual style is akin to that, the comic book come to life idea.
I forget if it was Frank or Matt who said this, but I think one of the things that they said is that they always tried to, with DuckTales, if you're going to do a new or a different character or something, it has to be in service of the characters that we already know. And I think that's one of the really cool things, like even in the first season, like when you introduce Gizmo Duck in the Beware the Buddy system, that episode is a Launchpad story, but it's introducing Gizmo Duck for the people. So it kind of, you tie stories of introducing new things to things that we already know. And I think that's one of the real strengths of the show.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then and it's interesting because it's by design, but it's also a tremendous amount of work. There's an incredible care for those. I mean, I could say this objectively about Frank and Matt. It's like these characters are like living inside. Like right now, Frank's at home, and there's an episode of DuckTales playing in his head that we never made. Like he's just like there, like he's got his kids, his actual human kids, and then like Webby is he's probably got like a web like a room for like there's a
The Webby and the nephews. Yeah.
like it's like those guys love these characters like and they're like they in their hearts, you know.
Yeah.
So our job is to respect that and then help support it to make it flesh out of the concepts, you know.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to Last Crash of the Sunchaser. That episode specifically, I think you both know, is a very key turning point for the series because you have Scrooge and he's finally kind of backed into a corner where he has to tell the boys about the Spear of Selene. John, kind of coming into this from a directing perspective, having this episode that's such a crucial point, you know, what are some of kind of the challenges for such a emotional story?
Let's see. You know, I'll start with the script. And so when I read the script that Frank wrote, it was Frank's episode, and he's involved in all the stories, but you know, because he's a story editor, he doesn't get to write, you know, as much. But when he does write, I think it's his baby, you know. And so what was challenging from a director's standpoint was most of the story took place in the Sunchaser, in the plane, and but the emotional weight that was coming through, or actually, I would say it was being set up in at least the first half or 2/3 of it, leading to this big not milestone, but big like reveal of what's been brewing from all the previous episodes. And because I've worked on some of the key episodes that kind of carry some of that storyline, it helped me understand like what we were leading up to. And I think one thing I'll say is the way we like released the reveal of what really happened didn't come until I think somewhere in the animatic revision phase. It wasn't in like I think initially, I think Scrooge had kind of, after the separation with the family, I think he just kind of, we found Scrooge alone in his house. But the visuals of what happened to Della, I don't think that was coming through, or we've found that solution till way later.
Yeah, everyone sensed a lack in the animatic phase, that it needs to drive a deeper, there needs to be a bigger punch in the heart.
Right.
And
I knew where Frank was going. I mean, our writers on the show they're hands down, you know, some of the great writers I worked with in my career, and I always wanted to do justice for them because it's such like really well written, sophisticated writing, in my opinion, and I wanted to do service to that, but also really establish the characters and you know, I'm bringing in, you know, I always ask myself, what can I do to help in this endeavor? Like, what is my stamp? What will help elevate the beautiful characters and the narrative that's being put on the pages? And taking my experience even from Kubo and you know, growing my sensibility from a more cinematics perspective. And cinematic isn't just about shots, it's just how you use a camera and how you help identify the thought process of each character throughout the narrative, you know. And so knowing that it all took place inside that plane, I had to figure out, you know, the arcs of all the characters' thought process that was leading up to that pivotal point in the story. And so I actually took the challenge it was really fun for me because I wasn't sure what I could, do with what was given to me. But Frank was very gracious about, allowing me to like explore, and we would exchange ideas and why I was doing certain things. And the support really comes in after they see the animatic, because they actually see what you've been doing with your story team, all put together, all edited together. And then from there, we'll find spots that aren't communicating or areas that we can improve. And that's where I think some of the emotional weight that was being set up wasn't really coming through in the first run of the animatic. And that's where the creative process comes in, where it's a big collaborative effort to find how to deliver this episode.
And we're all in there too. It's not, what's wonderful about DuckTales is like, at least like the kind of key team, right? Like, the directors, Matt, Frank, myself, the writers, like, it's like we all get in there and we just get in a room, and we were like really transparent about what's landing, what's not, what needs to happen, and it's really tricky jigsaw puzzle, because you have these like real world facts that are always working against you. It's a 22-minute episode.
Right. That's the
It's got to be funny. There's great Frank jokes. There's great, but how do you create room for these emotions to land? And that's I give that to John, because that's John going like, I have to basically get into the story and open up space somehow, but not lose anything else, important. And that's what's tricky when these, because like there's a lot of times where you maybe in other podcasts you hear like when the episode is over its time limit, that's already a hurdle. Like you got to cut it down to time. We have really strict rules in network. The network rules are really strict. These things that come in at like not 22, because you have commercial breaks and you have those types of things. These things got to come in. I don't know. Don't quote me on this. I think it's 18 and some change or something. And if you need more time, and Disney's can't play a commercial, you gotta like get that approved by executives all the way. You gotta like call Bob Iger.
Yeah.
You're like, Bob.
Yeah.
Can you get? Yeah, we need that.
Yeah.
We need that.
Can you
commercial.
give us a pass on this?
We need 10 seconds.
Yeah, can you tell Mattel to kind of back off a bit on this release?
Dog with a blog, like, you guys, can we just maybe have like a short rerun of that one? It's like you have to go through all this work. So what's really tricky is, and what John is amazing at, is like it's a big Jenga. You'll hear the analogy of the Jenga. Like he'll have to like pull something at the beginning and shave 5 frames off, and go over
it's a lot of frame shaving,
and cut to buy you. The most important thing is the time. It's the audience is looking at the character thinking and feeling an emotion. Like, you think that would be the easy part. It's the hardest thing ever to do, especially for network TV.
Absolutely.
So that's another thing you want to put a pin and put a little flag there. Not only is John amazing at it, the whole DuckTales team is really amazing at that.
Yeah.
Because everybody's being really honest, and you don't have Frank going like, I want my joke in there. Everybody's like looking at everybody's work and going, how do we get this to play? Because that's what's most important.
Yeah, because some of our board artists too, I want to give credit to. We had Sebastian Duclos and Sam King and Jason Riker, and they're all big fans of the show, of course, especially these Disney duck characters, and so they were really into really showcasing their personalities, but they also understand what we were doing with the show, and how Frank and Matt brought so much character and personality to the nephews and Webby, right? And and you know, this one was really emotional because we've been setting up that the nephew's been looking for their mom, and then setting up like what that means to them, and really going there and not being afraid to really bring a downer to an episode. And you know, like I even like tapped into my own personal story, where because I grew up without a father and I never knew who my father was, you know, and there was a time when I grew up in Japan with living with my grandparents, and my mom was in the US. So I know what it's like to miss, you know, your mom, and really understanding that from a young age. And so I was really tapping into those thought process, those emotional thought process.
Absolutely.
And I think that really helped, of course, you know, really finding that moment where are these characters, where are the nephews at, and then as kids not knowing how to handle their emotion, they put the blame, and it's easy for them to put the blame on Scrooge, because I mean, when Scrooge kind of opened up finally, right? They
Right.
quickly turned on him, and
Everybody.
yeah, everybody did. And at first, I was like, can they turn that quickly? You know, after what they've been through, and they know who Scrooge is. But when it's tapping into that family emotional core, I think it's a lot more sensitive from a kid's perspective. So I
Right.
totally bought into it, and then so I like really like, you know, put my you know, both feet in, and I was like, I'm gonna play this out. And I think that's where Frank was coming from anyway. And so the way the boards were coming through, then the animatic, all that was fine. I think what was in the script was the visual reveal of what Scrooge actually did. And you know, and because I have to look at both sides, right? What Scrooge was thinking, and why that wasn't being shared with them. And also you have to be aware of the audience and how they're taking in the information, you know, as a director. So
Because it's as big of a reveal for the audience as it is for the kids in the show. Because it's like the audience
Yeah.
has
right,
been kind of following along with the kids, wondering the same
right,
questions.
And also,
right,
like
right.
on the surface of the narrative, it's like a mystery, right?
Right.
They got the murder board, and you have all of the complexity of the putting the pieces of paper together. So you
Right.
have, that's like the drive, that's like the narrative drive, but the emotions underneath have to, like, you know, like all the essence is in the script, but when it's playing to time, there's that, and then there's the emotions at play underneath it that the audience could really sense. Like, I'm not, because that's what's tricky about DuckTales. They're very dynamic in that respect. They got a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of moving parts, you know. So there's always a real ambition. And we always talked about the writing team as being, it's a gross statement, but it's like they're postmodern. It's like
Yeah.
Yeah,
postmodern writing. It's like, how do we get a cartoon and smuggle postmodern writing into a cartoon? Yeah, and then that's what we get. So you have these really complex mechanisms, and yet you need the emotion to come through. Like they
Right.
have, when
yeah,
it happens, you have, the audience has to be there with the characters
yeah.
in the
Right.
reveal.
And yeah, so you know, in the editing room, you know, I'm showing Matt, you know, how the episode's playing, and then it's like, we know we have something special because you can feel the characters, and the voice delivery is beautiful as well. And so, but you know, you know, and I'm always searching for opportunities, but not just opportunities. Like I said earlier, like I want to provide justice. Like I want to provide, um, you know, like provide the level of respect that the writing provides, right? And I want to
Right.
make sure that comes through on screen. And the crew is so open. I should say the leadership is so open in taking ideas, that in the editing room, I said, Matt, you know, let me throw this out to you, you know. And it's always like, it's tricky because you have to think about, you know, screen time and budget and scheduling and deadlines.
Right.
And I said, you know, I told Matt, I said, Scrooge, like I know that, you know, deep inside he did make the effort, but we've never shown what that was. And so, you know, I said, I want to see him really, really like looking for Della, that he didn't like just give up, you know,
Right.
what had happened.
The kids didn't really
And
allow two sides to that conversation once Scrooge
right,
finished his story.
right. And I said, you know what, let me try something, and let me try providing the visuals when he goes into that room at the end by himself, and when he sits on that chair, like, I want to see him reflect back, and we as an audience get to see, you know, all the attempts, and it'll just be like I just said, there'll be slides. We don't have to animate them, you know, it'll just be key moments that reveal the, you know, what had happened. And there was a happenstance there, and I'm trying to remember exactly, but one thing was really interesting, because early on Sean had designed the money bin, um, and you know, at the very bottom there's like a tracker on it to move all the gold coins and all. But that original visual that he had provided in the early development phase, and it was used in, you know, the Great Dime Chase and all that, all the other episodes. But you know, I thought, what if he, I forget if it was my own, I don't want to take all the credit, but what if it, like, he had more money than what's in that money bin, and then that he used most of his fortune looking for Della. And
Yeah.
so, and what that would mean, and so it's like sending the search party and sending as much rockets up into the space as possible to just locate her, you know. And so that's where all those visuals came in.
And it's really brilliant because, like, when that was presented, is again thinking about screen time. You already had, when we should circle back around to Dave Tennant's monologue, because that
Oh yeah,
is
right.
one of the most amazing things ever. But what John was presenting was actually a big chunk of screen time. And then there was like, well, what, like, you got to bring in the actors to do, and this Frank gonna have to rewrite. But what John's idea that came, it's perfect for the audience because you just revisit the dialogue that was already presented. So the audience is actually hearing, as you're saying, Jonathan, like the audience is witness to what's really happening in the flashback photos, and you're just hearing what the voice had said prior to. This is a juxtaposition. It was a very cinematic concept that is like brought it up to like kind of raised it bar for that level of intent, of just emotional intensity, right? Which
Right.
obviously culminates in what was in the script, which was the final statement where I think it's Miss Beakley who's like, I think she's like, "Are you happy now?" or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's like, "I am." Like,
Yeah.
Dave Tennant already delivered "I am," like as if all of that stuff was there prior to, but it
Right.
landed so much more because of all that led up to it. And so it culminated in those two words that that's where we got the punch to the heart.
Right. You see him kind of just slump in his chair, and then he goes into the flashback, and it's almost just
Yeah.
like, you know, he's thought through these things hundreds of times before. You know, he's already beat himself up over it and
Yeah, exactly.
kind of
See, yeah.
come to peace with it. But now, you know, having a family has caused him to relive all of this. And it's like he knows he did his best, but that doesn't change how you feel when somebody accuses you of something.
Exactly. And Jonathan,
Right.
that's the type of thinking as an audience that you're trying to provoke that synthesis so that you are filling in the rest of the gaps. But it's pretty brilliant because all it really was, to John's solution, were stills that were, and
Right.
that was purely budgetary. If we had a bigger budget, it probably would have animated it. But I think it's actually better in a way that it's not, because it almost feels like a fragment. It's the memories that he's having, to what you're saying, Jonathan, is he's thought of this over and over again. They're disjointed, and it sort of helped. It's that one of those things, like every once in a while, you know, you can make a lot of really good episodes, and that's great. But every once in a while, it's like everything just sort of
Yeah. I mean, even Matt Youngberg's like, you know, it'll be great to have the nephews, you know, what they were arguing about earlier to come back during those slides, you know, flashback slides as echoes. And I said yes, you know, because that's going to really juxtapose what's happening,
Absolutely.
what's happened. Yeah.
And then I don't want to take away, because that's the most important thing is like the performance and the way it lands with the audience.
Right.
But it's interesting to integrate this into the conversation, which is the nod to the original car, the first image of Scrooge McDuck. Like that came from, again, we're all authors in this, so it's hard to, like John's saying, it's hard to pinpoint. But I'm just gonna go on a limb and have Frankie mad at me later. Like in an early stage before all of this, we always had in the script that Scrooge was going to settle in Say I Am. I mean, that was the big, beautiful, and that is with the monologue, which is what starts it, right? Day Tennant, Scrooge's monologue is what starts the movement of this final sequence, right? To make it moving and powerful. So when that was in the script, I'm always looking for just an interest. What can we do visually? What can, you know, it could range from all sorts of things. It could be a concept. It could be, and in this regard, I was like, you know what would be really cool? What if Scrooge lands in a pose? This is just for nerds. Anybody who knows this will know that where he lands is he lands in the same pose as the original Karl Barth. It's our ultimate homage. But there's also something that kind of works with it narratively. It's our big bow. It's like it's the end of the season. You know, it gets fun and wacky after, but this is this episode and this scene is sort of the emotional high point of, it's really the down point, right? It's the most intense, emotional Empire Strikes Back downer ending. We're gonna be okay lost after, but on top of that, let's do an homage to Karl Barks and have him sit in the room, which caused a new scene to have to happen, which was, they were cool with it. They're like, how's that going to work? Because he was just going to sit in his chair in his office, which was set up a million times. Well, he's going to, you know what, and so this was our proposal. We were like, what? Okay, this isn't even going to be in the narrative, but this is what we could do. There's one corner of the room of his office that was never shown. It's usually the side of the room, the corner of the room in which the camera is back is to the room, right? It's where you place the camera. And it's like, you never saw that in any of the episodes. What if there's a door that's locked? That is his worry room, in which he started his fortune, was always in that room. And then we got to a certain point in his career where we got more comfortable, that room got kind of shut down because it comes with the emotional baggage. Right. The emotional baggage could be that that's when he lost, like, Della. You know, it's like, that's what, and this is something that the audience doesn't need. We're not shining a light in it narratively. It's just in the background. And so and that's what's great about our team. They're like, what are you gonna, like, what narrative? Like, you're gonna get a lot of narrative out of that? Probably not, but that's okay, because what we do is we put stuff in there anyways for the joy of it. And so it's another layer of, like, nod and to show how much we love the source material. And that's what happened. It was a tricky bit. And John had to deal with that part too. The logistics of, now he's got to open a drawer, open a room, go in a room, pull the sheets off of it, land. But then what ended up happening out of it is it ended up becoming an incredibly great set piece for when Magic Dispel comes out. That wasn't figured out yet. And so it ended up, so it was another serendipitous thing, because you had that on top of the fact that you had this big narrative payoff. and again, in the early stages, we didn't have it cracked yet. And so when John got to that point, when he's like showing this flashback, it only made sense that it's even, he goes into a different room that we've never seen before. The audience who doesn't know that it's a callback to the original panel drawing that Carl Barks made, Introduction to Scrooge. If anyone doesn't know that, there's a narrative reason for going in the room he's never been before. And that's
Right.
the room where he's really going to sulk in the, in, you know, and so it was another serendipity. It was like, and so it's one of those things where you learn that you really got to just like, you got to follow go after every muse until you run out of time, kind of thing.
Right, and figure out how it all works together.
Yeah, and play and orchestrate it in, and it was like crazy because you had John sort of authoring that and Matt orchestrating that, and you had Mike with the ideas, and you had Frank who had, you know, and all of that stuff, and it kind of all like that was, it's one of the most important things that I've ever worked on in my life was that episode, because it just was like, I don't care what anybody says, I think it's absolutely brilliant, you know, how it came together.
Absolutely.
It's such a passion project, you know. It's not just like a nostalgia project for us and the pressure of it, but we knew that if you know, like pursued it with our passion for the property and what we remember growing up with, and from, you know, the nostalgia connection of it, and being part of that sort of authorship as a crew, and Frank and Matt having the openness to like listen to the passion, right? Because and Sean, as you were telling that, I do remember being in that conference room, and you're like, "Ooh, I know, I'm gonna use that image from Carl Barks's, you know, comic for that room," and I forget if that was already cooking in your head for the following episodes, but
no,
you're like,
wasn't. No, that was
you're like, this should be here, you know. And I think that's where it started. So it's sort of like, you know, jumping into, it's not a big problem, but we also knew that it wasn't enough, right? We wanted to deliver something great as always, and that's always our goal.
And this is late in the game. Like when you start getting into those animatic periods, you're running out of time. You have the executive pitch, you got the executive screenings, and then you get a lot more people, and you're getting close to the finish line. And that's the thing that DuckTales did, as well as Gravity Falls. Like
when you all know and sync, you know, have that collaborative syncing moment where you know that this is the right direction, and that we have to deliver it this way, and there's no other solution. I mean, no other option, but like, or alternate ideas that would be any better. Like, we knew, our gut told us that we have to deliver it this way. So that's when, like, we animators lose sleep, you know, over our work. But, you know, this is where it's like, you know, that's where it's worth it for me, because because it's something that, you know, like, as you know, when I was growing up as a kid and watching like pivotal moments in animation or film, it's like, that's what sticks with you. Like, you know, Goonies like sticks with me a lot, and so it's those moments that are like that I wanted the audience to relate with, that they could always kind of have that kind of great memory of a show or whatever, you know. So it's like, as long as we put in as much as possible that Disney will allow us, we will.
And you know, we absolutely should give props to the executives, because at this point it's kind of on Youngberg, right? Youngberg has to be, he's got us with him in, like, this is all happening in a room, right? And you had Eric Coleman, Khaki Jones, Edward Mejia. These are the execs that are responsible for this thing getting made. More importantly for them, getting made on time. But their hope is that it's as good as it could possibly be. So it's on Youngberg, who's like passionately talking to them about what we plan to do. because it takes time to do it, right? Like,
Right.
you gotta like do it now. Like we got to figure it out, and then we got to do it. And they're the ones that got to get put on ice. And by then there was a lot of trust, so they had a lot like, okay, you guys, we know it's kind of late, but we trust you guys to make this good. So go do it.
Right. And you
Go.
have to work with like executives, because I know for a long time, episode order was just kind of unimportant. You know, just kind of like when the episode's done, it goes out. But when you have a more serialized story like DuckTales, you can't air an episode like this
Yeah.
out of order,
Yeah.
or it
No.
loses, all of its meaning. So you need to make sure that that production is all in
Yeah.
line, so the executives aren't tempted to be like, oh wait, we need an episode to fill this week's slot.
Exactly.
What's done?
Exactly. Yeah, and that could throw off an episode. If this kind of change that happens at this stage, they could switch them. But yeah, they were all interconnected, right? This is basically the first episode of the season finale that sets up the season finale, right? So yeah, there's all that tricky stuff, and everybody's sweating it, but everyone's so passionate and supportive of each other that we all like, help it with. And then Matt's he's driving the ship, so we were just like, Matt, it's like, okay, I'll do it. Don't worry, and so it's all on him. Showrunner is the one that's responsible, but yeah, that was the team effort to put that together. But John gets the credit for identifying
too nice. Yeah.
what's needed at that pivotal moment to really, and then the team getting together to problem solve.
Well, yeah, John, you took the problem of this moment isn't hitting as hard as we need it to, and essentially solved it with this scene that just adds so much weight and depth and layers to Scrooge. I kind of wanted to talk about it too, because the Carl Barks reference works from a character level as well, because in the comics that's the very beginning of Scrooge's arc, and kind of he hasn't changed. And at the very beginning of this episode, Scrooge tells Beakley, he's like, I haven't felt this happy, and I can't even think about how long. But by the end of the episode, he's kind of gone through this degradation to the point where he's right back as a character, essentially where he started the series. And so I think choosing that image for that really works from
and those were like kind of the things that like I never know. A lot of times when it comes to production design and the visual aspect of things, it's often got to work on a layer more metaphorically necessarily than it is like on the surface narratively, depending on what it is. So I think like that's sort of what was like going through, like the impetus. Basically what you were saying was like what sparked the idea for me. It didn't necessarily have to be that, but it just has that kind of like, that works really good like that. If anybody knows that, that's interesting. It's just like interesting. We're taking history and we're contextualizing it in our story, and yet it was never made for that intention, and yet it sort of fits the character. That's the reason for the, like, you just get hit with every once in a while, the creative muses come down and give you a smack, and
might solve a mystery, recontextualize history.
And there's like the meta. It's like the meta of it just like it gets deep.
There's
that was
there's a lot.
That was like what the idea was, and yet there was never any. That's great.
I mean, I was also gonna mention, and I can't recall, but and I would assume this was already in Frank's head, but the way the Sunchaser crashes, and it's like teetering on that mountaintop, right? The allegory that it sets up, that the family is in flux here, and any little thing could just like break them apart. And what is going to possibly cause that break? It's what the kids have been hunting or looking for, what Scrooge has been keeping secret,
right?
And all that is writing, that those two subject matters are all writing right there, and I love that aspect of it, and from my point of view as a director, also it's how to stage that as well, and and at what moments do we show the the possibility of
The shift,
tipping
yeah.
over, you know.
Right.
And and for me, it was also like planning the logistics of how they need to be to keep that plane balance, and how to keep the believability of the characters being on each side of the plane to help help it from, or prevent it from tipping over, but trying to use a narrative that was being established in the
Right.
show to like really help emphasize that, you know.
Yeah.
It was
And so that
also,
was really fun for me.
and logistically it was tricky because it's also it's only an A story, where usually you have like a B story, a C story. So you're doing kind of time jump cut. The audience assumes that there's a time jump cut, like a time leap. And so you could play with time, but this is happening in real time in front of the audience the whole time. So we had to track. We also want to dramatize it as the emotions heighten towards the end. We wanted to move towards like a sunset palette. So,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of like inside, and then they eventually go outside. So there's a transition from daytime to sunset palette through the windows of the Sunchaser.
I think that's
That
such a beautiful thing. I don't know if you guys have seen the Amphibia season 2 finale, True Colors, but they do a very similar thing as that episode kind of nears the end, and the sunsets, everything turns.
it's actually very tricky to do in animation, you know, because you're tracking subtle gradations of both value shifts and color shifts from like sequentially one scene after the other.
Right.
Can become a tracking nightmare, especially if the vendor can't track it, which it's just really hard to do.
Yeah.
So it's something that we could take for, I don't think it should be taken for granted in live action. I think it's equally hard in live action, but you don't tend to have that opportunity to do that animation. You wouldn't do it.
Or
You would
even on a
just,
daytime show.
yeah, you would probably just like blitz out the windows and just say that there's no outside, you know. But it was important metaphorically to, like, as John was saying, you had that teetering idea, you had the time of day, and you had the building pressure of it. So we
Right.
felt like we knew we had to do that. So that's yet another layer of technicality layered into the emotions of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about kind of the color choices for the stills, you know, kind of using a more sepia tone with occasionally highlighted like specific colors like red, or, you know,
Yeah.
things that brought more color. What was kind of the thought behind designing that? Did you kind of take inspiration from any other flashbacks, or is there like a specific way you wanted
Yeah.
to adapt that?
I think this was mainly a conversation with Matt in terms of John's solution presented like a quick fit. Like, in terms of like, okay, we didn't plan for this, so we didn't like color script it. So I think when we talked about it, we also felt as though it should feel like it shouldn't call attention to itself. It's such an important emotional concept that if we try to fancify it with like lots of color, you know, that it should just feel like a black and white photograph. Like, it
Right.
automatically says to the audience through years of repetitive use of flashback that it was actually the best solution. The only dynamics we'll add is we'll add that pop of color.
Like the, you know, the rocket fire and kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah, all the extra animation I wasn't even asking for, that the production allowed, which was a plus because I knew I was squeezing this in. So I was okay with just still images, but
And
all
stills
the
is hard. Like, our internal team we had to pull someone off of their normal rotation of like backgrounds and stuff, and characters too.
Yeah.
So that we could do those, and the stills tend to take a lot of time. It's almost like illustrations in a way, right?
Right.
They're delivering a lot of information in one image, and so, you know, they might not have animation connected to it, but they take a long time to, like, we got to compose it. But that's just us getting together and doing John boarding it out, and me building roughs and banging roughs out real quick to like give to a designer to refine and make into a beautiful final image. And I think the color, if the color ideas was, I think it's predominantly like a red, and the red is solely a bit of a plant for the Spear of Selene
Right.
color, right? The audience
Right.
isn't aware of this yet, but this is now we know that it was one. So we'll and obviously there's connotations that come with red. So it's like monochromatic with like this sort of single cut pops of color that'll then
Right.
lend itself into this. It's like I'm almost positive it's 1-to-1. I think it's the Spear of Selene color.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's weaved into it.
Okay, so one of the cool things that you did with both of the flashbacks, including the first one Scrooge tells, and this is kind of something that's added in the last one, is tell the story of what happened to the picture that the kids were trying to piece back together. In the first flashback with Scrooge, at the exact moment you're showing Della getting onto the rocket, there's like a mini camera animation, like kind of where that picture was taken. And then the second is part of the scene that we're talking about. The very last thing that happens in that is Scrooge, he like kind of bangs the table with the picture and he rips it up into the pieces that the kids have put together, which adds a whole extra layer to the story of the photograph, which, you know, isn't called attention to. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, John,
That
you
was,
remember
yeah,
that?
I think I want to take credit, but I'm not sure if it was all me again. But
I remember in the script that was by design. That was part of the script.
oh,
That's
that it was
that
a photo that he rips.
he rips.
Okay, okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Well, I was just thinking because, I mean, that wasn't in the initial flashback during Scrooge's monologue, because that's something that was more like a more personal moment
Yeah.
for him.
No, I think you're right, John. That's part of your solution. That's part of your solution.
Well, we wanted to find, you know, in that flashback, like as we revealed what he tried to do to find Della, we had to come back to that moment where, you know, he's like facing his failure, facing the loss of his, you know, like, you know, of Della. And so I wanted to see him cry, you know, like in that frustration of looking for her and unable to, right? So
Right.
so I think the ripping of the photo kind of came to mind. And again, like I'm not, I can't recall if it was just me, but there's some element of it was, I thought it was like perfect to reveal, like, because the kids find the ripped photo and they try to piece it together.
Yeah,
So if that photo is what,
yeah,
is what he's had, and then that's what he rips up, and we get that piece. I thought it was a nice visual, you know,
Yeah.
button or connection, you know, and I love these things that kind of, you know, again, finding opportunities where you can layer in the connectivity of it all, and it all kind of makes sense. Doesn't have to be pinpointed, but like there's a part of me that's like, it's too logical, and in storytelling, you know, people always say like, you don't have to be so logical, you have to follow the emotion.
Right.
But there's an element that I can't give up, and so you know, I layer in as much as I can.
Yeah.
Just to add that extra level of believability, because there's no question of it. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why John was cast onto the show, because Matt's got one of his big things is he doesn't like to rely on cartoon magic, right? We called it that. Like the dirty word used is like cartoon magic is like the reason why, like Matt's he doesn't like when somebody pulls like a giant gun out of a little backpack. It's cartoon magic. Audience will forgive it, especially if it's cool or it's done well. But there's always a plausibility so it's that juxtaposition of the plausibility against the sort of fun silliness, right?
Yeah.
Like this again, that fine line that John executed in his original storyboard, right? Which is like, okay, John's going to put that kind of mental effort into each and every one of the logic problems, and that's Youngberg's jam. He loves that stuff. He loves the like intricateness, and Frank does too. And so, and for me, I agree. I totally agree. I may be like somewhere. I'm not polarized where I'm like, just make it cartoon magic. I don't care. I'm like somewhere like in the middle where I'm like, yes, that's important, but there is a lot of like that, the tracking all those pieces, which is like part of my job was like, we want that, but they, John, we set this up in this episode, and then this is a tear, and you get a little bit of this, and and that's where Matt doesn't have to solve that. That's my job. And so my job is like kind of figuring out visually how to like what's enough of like we had to design the spirit. We had to design the spirit Celine so early so that at least the symbol of it on the image when they finally put the pieces together,
right,
to show them what it is, like the photo, like. So there's a lot of like, okay, well now we gotta design that now because it's planted at the beginning, and then we got to make sure that it tracks, and it needs to track. Like
right. The moonlanders are going to build a whole fleet of the spheres.
Dude, we gotta like to almost to the point where we have to like figure out, and Matt loves that. Like he wants to build it. Like he wants I want it to be like you built it. Like if some fan decided to like backwards engineer the plates that are in it, I want it to feel like it would work. And you're like, all right. So that just like, okay, now let's figure it out. And I'll take on a lot of that because I love the challenge of that. So I think a lot of the complexity just comes with like the way they had to piece the pages together and how that had to be tracked.
Right.
Not just for like the series, but especially that episode. It's like all those pieces are flying around and they're piecing them together, and that's the tricky stuff. But
yeah, I think one last thing, I think you touched on it a little bit, but I want to talk about like in like specifically children's kind of TV animation, Y7, that sort of genre. I mean, you usually do see like epic cliffhangers or big emotional reveals or kind of teases for the next episode, or this is what's coming. And that's kind of been a thing. But I think what makes this episode special is I've never seen an episode that just leaves you on a dour note with no hope that things are going to get better. I mean, you assume they will, but there's no, it's like it doesn't end and then we cut to Della on the moon and it's like, oh, she's okay. It doesn't matter that Scrooge's crying. It just ends with, Scrooge alone in the chair, upset. Was that something that um just coming to work on and direct that scene? Do you know any of like, was there a debate about, can we do this? Can we end an episode that literally just, it's literally a complete, there's no hope for the future contained in this episode?
Well, I think, Frank designed it this way, right, in the script form and where it landed in the season arc. And I think
there was a lot of selling at that early stage of like what they planned to do to the execs, and I think there was pushback for sure. Because at the end of the day,
I can imagine
early, like probably before, like I think at outline stage, this is like what they plan to do.
And I said I'm searching for opportunities, and as an audience, I want to see what Scrooge had done. But I think instinctually, if you left the audience without showing the level that Scrooge has gone through to look for Della, you might not like Scrooge anymore. And how do you follow up if you're on the kid's side and you hate Scrooge, right? And so there has to be some sort of justification to say like why Mrs. Beakley and Donald is still accepting of him. We set up the rift between them at the top of the season, even in Atlantis, and what they're arguing about. But there was a reason why there was a separation until Donald brings the nephews to the house at the beginning of the season. But at this episode, we have to show Scrooge like what it meant to him and how much of his own fortune he spent. And I think there was that chart in with his bankers where the Della search budget was like way beyond everything else. And that was a key point in the storyboard image that I think I needed to kind of convey, that like he risked everything he had because he felt so responsible for losing her. And so I think that helps us as an audience who we've tracked all through the season, even with the kids blaming him and everything. But we, we as an audience have to like really feel for Scrooge, right? Because we never got that piece of the mystery until that moment. And so if we don't end the episode with that knowledge, like how do you move on to the next episode? Like you would care about what's going to happen to the family. Like, oh shoot, it sucks, they've separated. But how do you go to the next episode with this idea of like hate towards Scrooge, So it's like, I think it helps us like understand Scrooge better, and then to really care for him through the next following episode. And then that you have, as an audience, you start rooting for Scrooge, and you start telling yourself or towards the TV to the nephews, like, give Scrooge a chance, because he really did. You just don't know. You just don't know what he's been through,
Right.
So. And then I think, to your point, Jonathan, about like the demographic, right? It's like this, it's like we always like, the ideal thing is 7 to 11. Depending on the times at the studio, you could be encouraged to skew young towards 7. You could sometimes be encouraged to skew older, right?
Right.
DuckTales was the one that is like, it's always like really tricky, because like it's DuckTales. It's like, it's going to be compared to the original series. I think by design, it's meant to be skewed younger. But we always, especially Frank in that, has always wanted to push the needle up, knowing that if you trust the audience, even a very young audience, they are going to absorb they're going to get a little bit of this. It's like a little bit of both, right? It's kind of silly. They're ducks. They're talking ducks already,
Yeah.
So like, it's silly, but then you have these like deeper emotions that skew older. It's supposed to, and again, there's always that idea of like hitting a 4 quadrant. It's sort of that's the holy grail for a show. Is like, parents are going to be watching this with their kids, and if the kid is young, it could provoke a conversation or something, but the parent is going to feel the emotions and get wrapped up. It's for them too, kind of thing. And that was always the fine line. So in a way, you're right. It's kind of, on paper, it sort of skews in the middle or towards younger. And you would get notes from executives early on, like, it would be like, for any one of this big dramatic set piece that's a finale, can we get a couple fun goof ones? Can we just goof? And there is ones that are like that. They're just like goofy goof ones. But there's always like the team's desire to skew older, make it sophisticated, make it layered,
Right.
make it more, and but still stay within something that like a younger kid could enjoy, but a parent could see its subtlety and sense its subtleties.
I recall the executives telling me like that they want a mini movie. They want every episode to be a mini movie. And so, the writing had that,
Definitely
and so,
reflects that.
yeah. And so it's like, yeah. So, if it wasn't the passionate team that we've had, and the passion project, literally, yeah, I don't know if it would have the level of sophistication, and we all felt responsible to continue this franchise, this brand of DuckTales, to, and do whatever we can in our power, to kind of give it its, respect.
I think I remember Frank or Matt saying something about how the executives wanted to have at least one child character in every episode. So kids would kind of have a.
It was early, yeah. There was a lot of there's a lot of contradictory things that you want. I think they'll probably have said it. Like, that's why there's not a lot of Scrooge episodes.
Right.
They had to. It was like mandated that it's about the boys and Webby, and they should all, just every episode, especially the A story of the episode, the one in which we're investing the most time with, is like really revolving around those as the main characters. There's always a big fight to get. There's there wasn't a lot of opportunities for a Scrooge story, but they got in there, and this is obviously you'd argue whose story that I think it's Scrooge's story this episode.
Yeah.
And I think they were like, ooh, I think there was a little bit of like, oh, like no one was saying no. The executives were supportive, but there was, I think, a little bit of like a nervous, like, woo.
We hope this lands.
At face value, man, you got a bunch of kids that are going to be watching Dog with a Dog. I know that's not out anymore. I think they were still making it when we were on DuckTales. But, it's like you want to pop into, if you're going to come out of that and then you pop into like The Last Sunchaser, it's pretty downer and it's all Scrooge. There's no kids. The kids are crying. They look all sad.
You hit that end scene, and it's just like, next on Disney Channel, Dog with a Blog.
Yeah. We would always joke about that. You get this really emotional, like, animatic screening, and then would end, right? And the lights would come on. Everyone's kind of quiet because they're, like, affected by it. And somebody would go, next up on the Disney Channel.
Oh, that's so fun.
And then you cut the everyone would just laugh.
Yeah.
There's one more. I'll give you a bonus. I'll give you a bonus feature.
Sweet.
I know we're wrapping up, but I think it's worth talking about because John and I were both involved in the witnesses of the monologue with David Tennant. So I remember from my perspective, John, you can add in after, but like from my perspective, when Last Sunchaser script came in, like once I got a hold of it, and we, luckily, one of the lucky things is to be able to get these scripts as like while Frank's writing it. I'm like, I need to know what's going on in there. Like, well, how many locations are we going to have to deal with, and what do you got cooking up, Frank? Because we got a pretty busy schedule. So I remember getting the script, and I usually tend to read scripts at first. The first pass of the script is just to kind of take in the story.
Yeah.
I'm on it. So I'm like, sometimes it's business. I'm like, oh, that's cool, whatever. Yeah, this is great. Oh, this is a good episode. Okay, the next thought is like, okay, this is like, we're gonna have to break this down. This one, I was like, read it, and it was fantastic, and I was like, and that monologue was like pure poetry to me. This is where Frank's just like, letting his writing chops, just like poetry. It was like Pablo Neruda. This is so good. Like, man, this is. And I was all excited right away. I went over to Frank and I was like, dude, Frank, the episode's amazing, and holy that monologue, that's gonna be like a minute long. Like that's a minute of like screen time. And he's like, I know, dude, this is gonna be Rad Day Tennant. He's gonna kill it. And I was like, I never ask this because I know it's a slog. I have to be at the voice recording for this. I do not care. He's like, all right, well, Sean, you could come. And I run to John. John, dude, this is going to be your I don't know. John might have been already assigned to it. I don't remember exactly, but I was like, John, we got to go to the voice recording for this. And he's like, yeah. And we talked to Frank. He's like, yeah. So we get to, so it's this is like months later. It's now time to do the voice recording. Unfortunately, Dave Tennant's in England, but he's like, we got him like patched in, right?
Right.
And we're at a voice recording studio. And this is just to kind of sing yet another person that's sing Dave Tennant's praises. But it's like we were sitting there and he shows up, and I think he had already like memorized it. Like,
wow.
He didn't, it was amazing. Like, he doesn't come unprepared. Like, he knows the script inside and out, and he's ready for this monologue. We know it's a juicy one. It's probably the best. It's probably a big one. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, for Scrooge. He usually has a lot. He has a call to arms in the second season and stuff like that. This is definitely the first one that's like super gooey, just awesome. And Dave Tennant, my God, John and I were sitting there, and we recorded it on our phones so we could have our own personal. And Dave Tennant delivered the monologue flawlessly, first try, with all the emotions, just first take, just it's all there. And then we're like, And I'm like smacking Frank's head because I was sitting behind. We were sitting behind him because they're tiered seating in the voice recording booth.
Yeah.
And we're like smacking. Like, holy crap!
Yeah.
Okay, don't anyone else. Dave Tennant. It's a professional situation. Like, stop. But I'm like, oh!
Right.
And then
Yeah.
Franco's like, kind of like, oh, it's really good. He's looking at Matt, and I was like, don't. Do we? It's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Do we have him?
Yeah.
Let's have him do another just in case.
For safety. Yeah.
For safety, and maybe he could. And then so they give him some direction. Like, why don't you do to linger on this? And Dave sounds like, okay. Flawless the second take with exactly the adjustments in that they asked for.
Yeah.
Like unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was like,
I was in tears. I was like,
we were like
it was
crying.
powerful. It was so powerful. Yeah.
It was like so cool. And then Dave Tennant was like in it. Like he was in it. He's like totally feeling the emotions. And then he ends and he's like, all right, guys. All right, that's good. I'm really gotta go shoot a movie now.
Yeah, right.
Let me know if there's any problems.
Right.
And he like, I remember like he left and we were just like blown against the back wall. I was just stuck there for like a while. It was like so cool. It was like the coolest voice recording thing I ever experienced. It's just, and so it's like a personal thing. You don't have to put this in your. It's
No,
just like
that's amazing.
yeah, it was incredible. And if you listen to it, it's so emotional. Like it's so like the pain, the fact he's got to tell this truth, and then that I mean, holy cow, the I am. It's like
you landed that.
words. I'm gonna get that tattooed on my chest, like I am, like real big. No one's gonna know what it means, but I know what it means.
David Tennant has such a rich voice too.
Yeah.
It's just like it's got so many layers to it. He was really perfect casting for Scrooge.
It was like that was like the cherry on top of like what was already like a really special episode, you know, and it was great.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to ask is just for the future animators up and coming in the world of animation, what advice would you give? And also, where can they find you to follow you and what you're doing?
You know,
for me, Twitter, Instagram, is the easiest place to go. I get actually people that are interested in the career of animation actually find me through LinkedIn a lot. I get a lot of people coming in from LinkedIn. I would just suggest that if you do, because I get a lot of just like link requests, but no context. So like if you're interested in like actually hearing from me or linking with me, then it's best to kind of share your viewpoints and what what you're looking for, so I can help. And I do my best to engage with people as much as possible. I just apologize in advance if I don't get back to them right away, but that's all I can say. But yeah, I am reachable through those platforms. As for a career, if you're interested in directing, pursue story and storyboarding, and really just watch all the shows and movies that you love. And if you find movies or shows that you don't like, just find out why you don't like them, because that's part of it too, and what not to do or why it doesn't work and what does it need to make it work.
Right.
Start asking those questions.
And to add to that is like to not judge them like, oh, I like it. I think it's judging them critically, like applying a critical thinking cap on and looking at why it doesn't work formally, not like, oh, I don't like it because it's boring, or I don't, I think it's re-looking at it, and everything's up for grabs, right? To John's point, like B movies, TV show, everything's up for grabs for analysis, but not like opinion analysis. It's like, why didn't it work? Like, why is it?
And a lot of times it doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work not because of the creators. It's just because of the production challenges or studio challenges. And or you have certain producers or executives or studio have the last say and will take control creatively. and the original creator, writer, or director may not have been able to have the power to deliver in their own taste. So you just have to take everything with a grain of salt. I'm learning a lot through my career journey, and so yeah, just it's good to keep that perspective when you do study work. Yeah.
Right. Build people up. Don't bring them down. Support
Right.
each other and your achievements,
Exactly.
anything big and small.
Yeah, you
Right.
don't know, like, and I could say segue with that and by addressing that, which is like you don't know what, unfortunately it is tough in the business, so you don't know what went into it that made it not work, to John's point, and that everybody's always trying their best to make it work. So it should be identified as like, oh, the author did a bad job and they're not good. Like there's so many factors. Like this stuff is really hard to create. Like
Right.
just like what we said. Like if you look, like the Frank script was totally brilliant, and look how much work it took to manifest it. You had everyone's like sculptors sculpting the actual thing, the entity, which is the show itself,
Right.
into existence, right? And so like that, so like my whole thing when it comes to like giving, basically like letting younger like students of the craft and people who want to get into it, I already like boiled it down to like fundamentals in my head, and it all relates to this, which is like, first off, in terms of the craft, it's story and character and clarity are like the king and queen of like that chess game, right?
Go read Story by Robert McKee.
Go read everything that you could possibly read about it, right?
Right.
Most importantly is read that and then do something, and if you really have the time, do it that way and see what doesn't work, right? And
right.
Like it really is, it's a really exciting time too for technology is such now that you could get a lot of like the filmmaking aspect of all of this. If you could get it, like you could just, it's like you could download and program, you could, so there's kind of no more excuse to start making stuff, right? And seeing how it plays, just like we did with, that's what the bottom line is, like, how does it play? Like, how does it really work? And finding, and it's an ego thing. If you're looking at it, I think it's great. No, it's an audience. It's always about like, how does the audience respond to it? They're the ones that you're making it for, not you. You go be like a painter, live in a cabin, which is what I wish I could do, to be honest. But maybe when I'm old or something. Older, by the way. I'm already old. Older. And so like that's it. But basically, like I always say, that's the top line. Story, top line. It's all about story. And what does that mean? So blanket
story is king.
Right.
Character and clarity are the king and queen of that game. Most of the time, us as professionals who've been doing this for ages, clarity is the hardest thing to make it clear, as clear as possible. Is this clear for the audience? Do they sense it? Like reflecting what John had said. Is it really emotionally? It's something's not clear here. Let's figure it out, right? So it's that problem solving, the critical thinking that goes into the problem solving.
Right.
And the other most important thing is it's an immensely collaborative. You're not just like working with people. You are like, you're in the trenches with people that you're really close to. So you can't be a jerk. There's no way out of it. You don't be a jerk. Be super open, be super cool to work with. Don't have an ego about anything, but feel strong about your opinions, but don't enforce them on the people. Like let them be analyzed by other people. It's like those things. You could learn the craft. There's a lot of technicality to the craft. You can learn that. You go to school, you could watch videos online, you can learn it. You make it yourself. But those are the key things that you have to have just to get onto the playing field.
Yeah, you can have the
Mm.
best story in the world, and if you don't convey it to the audience in a way that's understandable, it's not going
Yeah.
to land.
Right.
And you're gonna need a bunch of people to like that. They gotta get excited about if you're leading a project, you gotta be like really cool and fun to work with, because it's so much work. And
Right.
at the end of the day, we all say the same thing. Like most of the time, all of us professionals who've been in it for a while are always like, it's actually special if you're on a really good show.
Right.
What's most important is that you're working with the people that you really enjoy working with,
Yeah.
Right.
and that you can be like attack a project and not get worked up and be evenly killed about it, and put yourself out there and have people say, I don't think that works, and
Right.
being okay with it, or adding to an idea. We call it, the old Disney saying, plus it. John and I have that relationship. It's always hard. I'll like show something to John. I'm always nervous my first pass, because John is going to go in. He's like, is it clear? Does it work? But when John's like, I like this, is solid. I like this. This is good. It's like, it makes my work. Like, I'm like so happy. Like,
Yeah.
Because I trust
Yeah.
John implicitly,
Yeah.
and we've worked together for so long.
Yeah.
that
Well,
we
I make
trust
it
each
clear.
other.
Yeah, I make it clear that I'm not attacking the artist. I'm attacking the product and if the product's communicating in a way that you envisioned it,
Right.
That's key.
And
And
that yes and mentality.
Yes, and
Yeah.
is it good?
right,
It's great.
right.
It works great. It's like the no but person. Like, we've worked with them. Like, it's crazy. And what's kind of tricky, and this is high stakes, but this might add to a student the level of stakes that's involved. There's an interesting thing about this kind of work, because there's so much money involved, and there's not a lot of, and there's never ever enough time to do it. And it's all it takes is one no but person, and they'll muck up everything. It
Yeah.
isn't just it bugs you. They'll drive a project into the ground until somebody addresses it, which is horrible. It's high stakes. It's hard.
Right.
The one no but person. Nope. But what I think is it's got to be yes. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe it's this. Yeah,
Right.
and maybe we could do this, and then everyone looks at it, it's like, or maybe it could be that, and that kind of
That
thing.
acceptance and positivity of what you've put out, is an idea that you came up with, and we need to treat it on equal with any other idea, because
Yeah.
that's sometimes where the best stuff is born, is from the most unexpected places.
It's like it's a layered. This medium is about layering. It's not purely authorship of the written word, where it's a single art person or one artist, a Promethean artist that's like building it up out. It's not. It's a bunch of people layering stuff onto it to build it up into something that doesn't exist.
Right.
And I think that's, to me, that's the core thing. Like, don't be a jerk.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, and one more thing from me, I think if you are just getting your start in the industry, or even going into it, like the way I distilled it down is the 3 Ps, and it's the people, the place, and the project, and pursue to get all 3 if you can. And if you do that throughout your career, you'll enjoy and have a lot of fun. Because if you have a bad project or bad studio or place that it's being made at, but you love the people, you'll have fun.
That's okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, like, just think about the people, place, and the project, and pursue to have all 3. And when you have all 3, it's you've hit the jackpot. And always, like, keep that in mind.
And you will, like, and to add to that, Tosh, which is great, the 3 Ps is awesome. You will, a lot of the times all 3 Ps won't be there. You have to just analyze it. Sometimes when you're young,
when you're starting out,
you have to go to whatever place that gives you an opportunity is more important. The one thing that will be a deal breaker would be like, I don't have the 3 P, like, I don't want to go to that place because of this. There's always something to learn. Every place could be helpful, especially when you're starting out.
You got to
the
break
3P
past that 3 years plus entry level requirement.
yeah, like there's it's true, and it's like just like
Yeah,
buckle up for those and know that it isn't
right.
going to be ideal. For me personally, like I don't know, John, like it wasn't until like a lot later in my career where 3Ps, you're just kind of lucky if all three of them snap into place,
Yeah,
and then often it'll end, and then you go on something else. You'll never three
yeah,
Ps all the way
yeah,
through. You're gonna
you'll
jump
ship.
around. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah,
for
it's
me,
a
I use that. Sorry,
oh,
I use that to even tell myself like it's not about the money either, because when you are being hired for these jobs, you have to ask yourself like it's the network, the longevity, or is it going to be educational? And when I went to Gravity Falls, like I was on primetime, Fox primetime, American Dad directing on a primetime show. I took a big pay cut.
You're making them
Why?
bucks.
Because I was on American Dad for so long. I was on it for 7 years, right? Seven, right? And
that's
that's a
like a
long
huge,
time.
yeah.
And I wanted to grow personally. I wanted to try different things. And so I was waiting for the right project, actually. I was ready to like look for something else after like 5 years at Fox. Um, but I had to be the right one to make the right move, because it had to be something that it's going to be fun for me and exciting as a project for myself. And the Gravity Falls just hit the genre that I wanted to play in. And it had Sean there, it had Alex there. There's a lot of people I knew who I met through Sean's class. And it was like, and it was Disney,
Yeah.
so it was like who, if you're in animation who want to work for Disney, like have that on your resume.
Right.
So it was like I gotta take the pay cut and take the hit. And I was fortunate enough that I didn't have so much financial responsibilities that I
Right.
could do that. And I made the jump. And that had like helped me in so many ways down the line. Like even going to like Leica, like, Travis Knight, the founder, owner, the CEO of Leica, like he loves Gravity Falls, and he brought it up in an interview.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and Gravity Falls is brought up, so much in our industry. I mean, even outside, even in live action world for the writers, because it's so well done.
It shifted
Um,
the narrative of Western animation to serialized storytelling, which kind of, led to DuckTales and
right. It is
stuff like that.
because I can
Absolutely.
see that was happening in live action.
That's the mini
And
right
when I
there.
was when I was on Gravity Falls, I was like, this is it's time for animation now. So
Right.
And that's why you kind of had a schizophrenic quality to what the studio was looking for, because they knew the sort of more movie-like quality of complexity that was being inspired by live action being put into Gravity Falls. I think Alex was just responding to that. It wasn't like he had a manifesto necessarily. It's like we're gonna make it. I think he just was like, I want to elevate. I want to do what I'm excited about that I'm seeing in live action. And here's this opportunity to do this in TV and animated TV. And I think the studio was really shocked by the fact that it's actually really hard to make too. There's like not to knock anything that came before it, but there's a lot of this formulaic quality to the way that the stories, they don't just perpetuate that storyline so you could get 7 seasons out of it, build
Right.
a big franchise and sell product and stuff. And here's this thing that was sort of they wanted that for it, but it was this thing that was sort of introduced, the sort of mini movie
Yeah.
concept depth into a TV series. And so it did help get executives excited, but they were very conflicted. So even on DuckTales, it was still a conflict. It wasn't like everyone's like, yeah, let's do. They were like,
Yeah.
well, like your what you said, Jonathan, like 7-year-olds, and we were saying like 7 to 11. There's a sliding scale,
Right.
kind of thing, and that's evolution. So in a way, I would absolutely give credit to Gravity Falls as being kind of an evolutionary sort of leap in
Yeah. I think
content. Yeah.
yeah, I know because and when a lot of people talk about kind of the modern state of specifically Disney TVA, a lot of the framework and setup for the shows was kind of founded by Phineas and Ferb's production setup,
Yeah.
and how you have just the way that that show is set up to make more episodes. But then you hear like Dan and Swampy talk about before they came in, TVA was totally different, and they were
Yeah.
really afraid to give approval on just outlines of episodes and then send them to boards to be written.
Yeah.
And to have that as part of the process. So it's it's interesting to see each generation of people who work in animation come in and kind of take a look at the current system and say, this is good. It might not work for us. There's more than one way to do things.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I agreed. And I think Phineas and Ferb gets credit for, like, I think we always called it like smuggling, right? You're smuggling this the dynamics to the show. And I think that's what Phineas and Ferb did. They still follow that construct, but within the framework of that construct, they are building out far more depth, right? In the characters, even though they're following what was predominantly like a relatively standard episode start and go to next episode. It's like the characters, you're tracking the characters, right? You're becoming familiar and friends with those characters over a long period of time, where then there's subtleties that are being added, and I think Alex absolutely was like, let's just like he pitched that series to have a closure, which is not usually what Disney likes to do.
Right.
It's supposed to be a 3-season commitment, one summer, 3 seasons, takes 3 seasons to get through it, and the kids go home.
Right.
Like that was the deal, but that was the risk that the studio was recognizing. Like it does have closure. It's going to close. Like those characters are going to arc through their experience, and they're going to go home, and they're going to be a different person when they get home.
Right.
And that's like what Alex really wanted to do, because that's what was happening in live action and stuff. And they reluctantly thought, that's interesting. Let's
can we make it siblings and make it during a summer?
Yeah, that's I know you're kidding, but yeah, I think that's the thing that they were like, well, that's cool, like that, we like that, that's familiar, we're familiar with that, but what about this arcing thing? And oh my god, Weird Mageddon, what?
Right, that whole story and Tale of Two Stands and everything like that.
Yeah, and that's smuggling too. I think once they got the green light, that started eking in, right? The layered dynamic. And again, you're right, I think, and then DuckTales was sort of building upon that and taking it to its more postmodern. That's the way I'll frame it forever, is taking those ideas, those concepts, and building upon them into even more postmodern, like a meta. Like there's a kind of meta reflectivity of like the ideas, and that's all part of it. It's a franchise,
right?
It's DuckTales, like, so it's really cool. Yeah, and then I think even like Dana's show is a reflection on that. Matt's show is a reflection on that. They're all like baby steps in a way towards a newer and better tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me.
Bye, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan.
And I'll see you back in Dimension 1.